Dustfall had once been the kind of town that believed in forever. The railroad used to scream through its center like a lifeline, bringing merchants, dreamers, gamblers, and brides with hopeful eyes. The saloon lights burned late into the night. Children ran wild between the wooden storefronts. On Saturdays, music spilled from the dance hall and drifted across the prairie like a promise. Now, the tracks were rusting. The last train had come 2 years ago. It never returned. Most families packed what they could carry and chased survival westward. Others left in silence, ashamed of the debts they couldn't pay. A few stubborn souls stayed behind, clinging to splintered porches and dry wells, as if grit alone could keep Dustfall breathing. Tonight was different. Lanterns flickered back to life along Main Street. Not because the town was saved, but because it was saying goodbye. A weathered banner hung crooked across the entrance of the dance hall. The last dance at dusk. Inside, the wooden floors had been swept for the first time in months. The piano, long neglected, had been tuned as best as possible. Folding tables held jars of preserved peaches and the last of Mrs. Calloway's apple pies. There would be laughter tonight, even if it had to be forced. Henry Lawson stood near the back wall, sleeves rolled up, collar open, hands rough from labor that no longer paid. He had repaired fences no cattle grazed behind, fixed doors on buildings already claimed by wind, stayed when it would have been easier to leave, because leaving meant surrender. And Henry Lawson did not surrender easily. He adjusted one of the lanterns, making sure the flame burned steady. The glow cast sharp shadows across his face, accentuating the quiet strength in his jaw, the loneliness he never spoke about. He hadn't expected her to come. Outside town limits, a horse slowed to a stop. Josephine Harper dismounted carefully, brushing dust from her dark blue traveling skirt. The prairie wind caught loose strands of her hair and tugged them free from their pins. She paused there, staring at the town she once swore she'd outgrow. Dustfall looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she had simply changed. The city had given her work, given her independence, given her long nights and crowded streets, and strangers who didn't care whether she stayed or left. It had not given her peace. When Mayor Collins' letter arrived, she told herself she wouldn't go. That reopening old wounds served no purpose. Yet here she was. The sound of distant piano notes drifted through the open dance hall windows. Josephine's chest tightened. 2 years ago, she had walked out of this town in anger. She had accused Henry of being afraid to dream bigger. He had accused her of chasing pride over love. Neither of them had apologized. Neither of them had chased the other. Some wounds don't bleed loudly. They just stay open. She stepped onto Main Street. Boot heels echoed against wood planks as she approached the dance hall doors. Laughter floated, outstrained but determined. People clinging to one final memory before the wind took the rest. Josephine pushed the door open. The room shifted. Conversations slowed. Eyes turned. And Henry felt it before he saw her. His hand froze against the lantern hook. He turned. There she stood, framed by warm light and drifting dust. Older, stronger, but unmistakably Josephine. For a long moment, neither moved. The piano faltered before picking back up. Henry walked toward her slowly, each step heavy with unfinished history. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, voice low but steady. Josephine met his gaze. "I didn't think I would either." Silence stretched between them, thick as summer heat. Around them, the first waltz of the evening began. Henry extended his hand. "One last dance?" he asked. Josephine stared at his hand, the same hand that once built her a porch swing, the same hand she let go of on the day she left. Outside, wind swept across the prairie. Inside, the future waited in a single choice. She placed her hand in his, and the music carried them forward. The moment Josephine's fingers touched Henry's, memory came rushing, back not gentle, but fierce. The music swelled around them. A slow waltz played slightly off tempo by aging hands that refused to let tradition die quietly. Lantern light flickered across the wooden floor as Henry drew her closer, one steady hand settling at her waist. For a heartbeat, They moved carefully, like strangers testing thin ice. Then instinct took over. Josephine remembered the rhythm of him, the solid warmth of his palm, the way he always guided without forcing, the way he looked at her as if she were something chosen, not merely found. "You've been well?" Henry asked softly. "Well enough," she replied, though her voice carried a truth neither of them fully believed. She had survived. She had worked in a dressmaker's shop in Silver Creek, learned to bargain, learned to live without leaning on anyone. Independence had been her armor, but armor is heavy. Henry studied her face. "The city treats you kindly." "It treated me honestly." He gave a faint, knowing smile. "That doesn't sound the same." Josephine swallowed. The room blurred as they turned in slow circles. Around them, townsfolk laughed louder than necessary, clinging to nostalgia like it might anchor them against what tomorrow would bring. Some were already packed to leave at dawn. Others had nowhere else to go. Dustfall wasn't just dying, it was unraveling. "You could have written," Henry said quietly. "You could have come after me." He held her gaze. "You asked me not to." She had. That night still burned bright. In her memory, their voices sharp, pride louder than love. She had told him if he truly cared, he would let her go chase something bigger than this shrinking town. He had let her go. At the time, she called that weakness. Now, she wondered if it had been strength. The music shifted into a faster tune, but neither of them stepped away. Henry guided her toward the edge of the dance floor, where the lantern light softened and the shadows deepened. "Why did you really come back, Joe?" he asked. The question hung between them. Josephine glanced around the room, the cracked ceiling beams, the patched walls, the people who once felt permanent. "I wanted to say goodbye to the town," he pressed. She hesitated. "To the part of me that belonged here." Henry's jaw tightened slightly. "And does she still?" Josephine looked at him, then really looked at him. He was broader now, sun-browned and steady. There was quiet endurance in his posture, a resilience that no abandoned railroad could take away. "I don't know," she admitted. A cheer erupted from the center of the hall as someone spun clumsily into a table. Laughter followed, bright but fragile. Henry exhaled slowly. "I stayed because I thought if I kept the lights on long enough, maybe something would change." And did it. He gave a faint shake of his head. "Not the way I hoped." Silence wrapped around them again, but it was different this time, less sharp, more reflective. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the distant prairie. Josephine felt it in her chest. "I used to think leaving meant I was brave," she said softly. "Like I was choosing a bigger life." Henry didn't interrupt. "But the city doesn't know my name," she continued. "It doesn't remember how I take my coffee. It doesn't care if I dance or not. And Dustfall does." She looked up at him. "You do." The words landed heavier than either of them expected. Another low rumble echoed closer now. Wind pressed against the dance hall windows. Henry's thumb brushed slightly against her side, barely noticeable, yet entirely deliberate. "You still think I'm afraid of more?" Josephine's breath caught. "No," she said quietly. "I think maybe I was." Lightning flickered briefly through the windows, illuminating the room in silver light. For a split second, Dustfall didn't look broken. It looked suspended, like the world was holding its breath. The music slowed again. Henry leaned slightly closer. "What are you afraid of now?" Josephine met his eyes. "That if I leave again, I'll be running from something worth staying for." Thunder cracked sharply overhead, and somewhere deep inside, something that had been smoldering for 2 years began to burn again. The thunder didn't roll away this time. It cracked directly overhead. The windows of the dance hall rattled violently, and several lantern flames flickered low as wind forced its way through the loose boards of the aging building. Laughter inside the hall faltered into uneasy murmurs. Henry instinctively shifted closer to Josephine. "It's coming fast," he muttered. Another flash of lightning split the sky, bright enough to bleach the room white for a heartbeat. Outside, the prairie bent under the first violent gust. Josephine felt the air change, the heaviness, the pressure. Dustfall had survived droughts and winters, but tonight felt different. Like the sky itself, had decided to finish what the railroad started. The piano player stopped then the rain came. It struck the roof in a sudden roar, as if poured from a bucket large enough to drown the world. Shouts erupted as wind forced the front doors open with a bang. A few townsfolk rushed to secure them, boots sliding across the wooden floor. Lanterns swung wildly from their hooks. Henry grabbed Josephine's hand. "Stay close." The roof groaned. A sharp cracking sound cut through the storm's howl. Josephine looked up just as a section of the ceiling beam splintered. "Henry." He pulled her backward seconds before. Part of the roof collapsed inward, sending wood and dust crashing onto the dance floor. Screams filled the room. People scrambled toward the exits as rain poured through the opening. The last dance was ending in chaos. Henry guided Josephine through the crowd, shielding her as debris scattered across the floor. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. Rain soaked them instantly, turning the street into slick mud. Across from them, the general store shutters tore loose and slammed against the building's side. A wooden sign snapped from its hinges and skidded down the street. "This way," Henry shouted, pulling her beneath the overhang of the blacksmith shop. They pressed against the wall, breath coming hard. Josephine's hair clung to her face, her dress heavy with rain, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the dance hall, the place where they had shared their first kiss, where they had planned a future that once felt certain. Now, part of its roof lay shattered. "It's like the town's fighting to hold together," she whispered. Or maybe it was finally letting go. A bolt of lightning struck somewhere beyond the train tracks. The sound vibrated through the ground. Henry looked at her through the rain. "You could still leave at sunrise. Before the roads flood." Josephine stared at him, stunned. "In case this place doesn't survive the night," he added. "And you?" she demanded. He didn't hesitate. "I stay." The answer was simple, firm. The wind howled again, but Josephine barely heard it over the pounding in her chest. 2 years ago, she left because she believed Dustfall would trap her. That staying meant shrinking her world. But what if she had been wrong? What if leaving had been the smaller choice? The storm intensified, ripping loose another board from the dance hall's side. Townsfolk huddled wherever they could find shelter, faces lit by flashes of white-blue lightning. Josephine stepped closer to Henry. "You asked me earlier what I was afraid of," she said over the wind. He held her gaze. "I'm afraid of building a life somewhere that doesn't build me back." The storm seemed to pause between claps of thunder. Henry's voice softened. "Then don't." It wasn't a command. It wasn't pressure. It was possibility. Another crash echoed as part of the dance hall porch gave way entirely. Josephine felt something inside her shift, like a lock finally turning. "I came back to say goodbye," she admitted. Henry's expression tightened slightly. "But maybe," she continued, "I was hoping for a reason not to." Rain ran down his face, but his eyes were steady, searching. "And did you find one?" Josephine reached for him, not out of habit, not out of memory, but out of decision. "Yes." The word was barely louder than the storm, yet it carried more weight than the thunder above them. The sky roared again, but this time neither of them flinched. By the time the storm began to weaken, Dustfall no longer looked like the town Josephine had returned to. It looked stripped. The rain softened into a steady drizzle, and the violent wind faded into restless gusts. Townsfolk slowly stepped out from beneath awnings and broken door frames, surveying what remained. The dance hall stood wounded. Half its roof had collapsed. One wall leaned dangerously inward. The crooked banner that once read "The Last Dance at Dustfall" now lay torn in the mud. Josephine stared at it, heart aching. Henry stepped beside her, rain still dripping from the brim of his hat. "It could have been worse," he said quietly. She glanced at him. "Could it?" He nodded, toward the people emerging around them. "No one's hurt. That's something." And he was right. Mrs. Calloway clutched her pie tin, but was smiling through tears. The piano player was already checking if the instrument had survived. A group of young boys laughed as they tried to push a fallen sign upright again. The town wasn't gone, but it was at a crossroads. Josephine wrapped her arms around herself, watching neighbors assess damage with tired determination. "How many will leave now?" she asked. "Some already planned to," Henry replied. Storm just makes the decision easier. And you, he looked at her carefully, as though weighing more than words. I've been holding on to Dustfall, because it's what I know, because my father built his life here, because it felt like leaving would mean losing something. Josephine listened, rain pattering softly against the muddy street. But maybe staying doesn't have to mean clinging to what's broken, he continued. Maybe it means building something new from it. She studied the horizon. The storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing pale streaks of dawn. 2 years ago, she thought ambition meant distance, that success required escape. Now, she understood something different. Ambition wasn't about running from small places. It was about shaping them into something greater. What if we don't try to save Dustfall the way it was? She asked slowly. Henry turned toward her. What if we change it? She continued. The railroad's gone. The town won't ever be what it used to be. But the land is still good. The fields still stretch for miles. What if this becomes a ranching hub? A trading stop for wagons traveling south. Something people choose to stop at. Henry's eyes sharpened with interest. Not a dying railroad town, she said. A fresh start. He looked back at the broken dance hall. We'd have to tear some of it down, he said. Then we'd tear it down, rebuild from the ground up. As silence settled between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was thoughtful, alive. You'd stay for that? He asked quietly. Josephine stepped closer, mud soaking into the hem of her dress. I won't stay out of fear anymore, she said. And I won't leave, because I think there's something better somewhere else. She met his eyes steadily. I'll stay, because I choose it. The weight of her words settled into him. For 2 years, Henry had kept lanterns burning for a town that was fading. He had waited for change to arrive by rail, but maybe change had just ridden back into town on horseback. He reached for her hand. You always did have the bigger vision, he said softly. She smiled faintly. And you always knew how to make it real. The clouds parted further, sunlight stretching gold across broken rooftops and muddy streets. It caught the remaining lantern glass and turned it into something almost beautiful. Around them, neighbors were already talking about repairs, about moving, about possibilities. Dustfall wasn't what it had been, but it wasn't finished either. Henry squeezed her hand gently. We start today, he said. Josephine nodded, not because she was chasing something bigger, but because she had finally understood that sometimes the biggest life you can build is the one you choose to stand and fight for. And this time, she wasn't standing alone. The sunrise over Dustfall did not feel like an ending. It felt like a reckoning. Golden light stretched across the prairie, touching the broken edges of rooftops and the muddied remains of Main Street. What the storm had torn apart was now visible in full truth. The dance hall stood half open to the sky, its splintered beams exposed like ribs, and yet smoke rose from chimneys. Boots moved through the streets. Voices carried again. Josephine stood at the center of it all, watching Henry and 3 other men haul away the fallen boards from the dance hall's porch. Their movements were tired but purposeful. There was no panic now, only decision. Some families had already hitched their wagons at dawn. They offered quiet goodbyes and promises to write. Others lingered, unsure, but unwilling to abandon what little still remained. Dustfall would shrink, but it would not disappear. Henry wiped sweat from his brow and walked toward Josephine. Sunlight caught in his hair, turning it almost bronze. He looked different this morning, not burdened, not defeated, resolved. We'll need to clear most of it, he said, nodding toward the damaged dance hall. The foundation's still strong, but the rest, it's time. Josephine looked at the building where they had shared their first dance years ago, where she once imagined walking down the aisle in a white dress, where last night they had nearly lost everything. It gave us what it was meant to, she said softly. Henry studied her, and now it becomes something new. A wagon rolled slowly past them, carrying crates of supplies salvaged from the general store. A few of the younger boys were already hammering planks against a broken window across the street. There was no music today, but there was rhythm in the rebuilding. Henry extended his hand to her, not for balance, not out of habit, out of partnership. Josephine took it without hesitation. "What do you see when you look at this place?" he asked. She stepped forward beside him, scanning the open land beyond the tracks. "I see cattle grazing where the rail yard used to be. I see travelers stopping because they choose to not, because they're forced to wait for a train. One see a market every Saturday. I see children running again." Henry smiled faintly. "You see a future. I see ours." The words settled between them, steady and certain. 2 years ago, she had believed that love meant sacrificing ambition, that staying meant settling. Now, she understood something deeper. Love wasn't a cage. It was a foundation. Henry turned her gently toward him. "You sure about this, Joe? It won't be easy." She met his gaze with quiet fire. Neither was leaving. For a moment, the noise around them faded. The town, the wreckage, the uncertain road ahead. All that remained was choice. He brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "Then we build it together." She nodded. That afternoon, as debris was cleared and plans were spoken aloud, for the first time, with hope instead of desperation, someone found the old fiddle miraculously intact, without ceremony, without banners or polished floors. A small group gathered in the open space where the dance hall once stood whole. The sky above them was clear. Henry looked at Josephine with a familiar softness. "One more dance?" he asked. She laughed gently. "You're relentless, only when it matters." The fiddle began to play, not perfect, not grand, but steady. They stepped onto the bare earth where wooden boards once lay. There were no lanterns overhead, no roof to shield them. The sky. They moved slowly, not in farewell this time, but in promise. Around them, a few townsfolk clapped quietly. Others simply watched, as if witnessing something fragile and important. The last dance at Dustfall had not been the end of a town. It had been the end of fear. Josephine rested her head against Henry's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and sure. "We almost let this slip away," she murmured. "But we didn't," he replied. Above them, the prairie stretched wide and waiting. And for the first time, Dustfall did not feel like a place people were escaping. It felt like a place beginning again. Hand in hand, beneath the open sky, Henry and Josephine chose not just each other, but the life they would build from the ruins. And sometimes, that is the bravest dance of all. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.